AITA for not paying a $300 bill for people I didn't even want there. She brought 5 kids and wanted me to pay for them. I have an aunt on my dad's side of the family. She's 50 years old, has 5 kids ranging from 20 to 12, and has spent her entire life perfecting the art of freeloading. She has this way of inserting herself into situations where she clearly isn't wanted, especially when there's something to be gained, whether that's free food, free rides, or free anything, really. If an opportunity arises for her to benefit at someone else's expense, she is there. Every single time. One particular incident that still makes my blood boil happened a few years ago when my dad and I were planning to go to the drive-in theater. It was supposed to be just the two of us, a father-son night. But my dad, in his infinite wisdom, made the mistake of mentioning it to my aunt. Without hesitation, she immediately asked if her kids could come too. And by asked, I mean she pretty much forced her way in, because my dad never says no to her. So instead of a simple, fun evening with my dad, it turned into a full-blown family gathering that I never agreed to. That's just how it always went with her. The moment she caught wind of something enjoyable, she found a way to insert herself and her children into it. No consideration. No shame. Just freeloading at its finest. With that background in mind, let's fast forward to last week. My little sister had just gotten her driver's permit, and I wanted to do something special to celebrate. It wasn't a massive accomplishment, but I still thought it was worth acknowledging with a nice dinner. So, I planned a small gathering at Olive Garden for Friday afternoon. The invite list was short and straightforward, just me, my dad, my 2 sisters, and my grandpa. I made sure to tell everyone to clear their schedules in advance because I didn't want anyone feeling left out. That was my first mistake. What I didn't realize was that my dad, in typical fashion, decided to take it upon himself to invite my aunt. Without telling me. Without asking me. Without considering how it would impact the evening I had planned. We arrived at Olive Garden at around 4:30 p.m., and I walked up to the host stand, requesting a table for 5. My dad immediately jumped in, actually, can we make that a table for 12? I turned to him, confused. 12? What are you talking about? That was the moment he nonchalantly dropped the bombshell, oh, your aunt and her kids are coming too. I could feel my blood pressure spike. My jaw clenched, and my entire mood soured in an instant. This wasn't the first time she had hijacked one of our plans, but I had been so careful to make sure this was just for our immediate family. And yet, here she was again, uninvited, inserting herself into something that had absolutely nothing to do with her. Still, I didn't want to make a scene. This was supposed to be about celebrating my sister's accomplishment, and I didn't want to ruin it. So, I swallowed my irritation and sat down, telling myself that, as long as they didn't cause any issues, I could just ignore them and enjoy dinner. 30 minutes passed before she finally arrived, fashionably late, of course, with all 5 of her kids trailing behind her. And just as I expected, she waltzed in like she owned the place, making a big production about greeting everyone as if we were here for her. I tried my best to ignore her presence, but I couldn't help but notice how she and her kids were behaving. They weren't just ordering food, they were ordering like they were dining at some high-end steakhouse with an unlimited budget. Appetizers, multiple entrees, endless refills of fancy drinks, and desserts before the meal was even finished. And the whole time, my aunt had this smug, entitled look on her face, like she had just pulled off some genius heist. Now, here's the thing, I never once mentioned paying for anyone other than my immediate family. This was never meant to be some grand, all-expenses-paid family feast. But, of course, I had a sinking feeling that my aunt had something else in mind. Eventually, the bill arrived. I immediately asked for it to be split, expecting to pay for myself, my dad, my sisters, and my grandpa. That's when my aunt, in the most irritating, grating voice imaginable, turned to me and said, "What do you mean split bill? I thought you were paying for us." It was like everything suddenly clicked. She had only come for the free meal. She had planned this. The excessive ordering, the way she acted so carefree about the entire thing, she had assumed from the start that I was footing the bill. I turned to my dad, my expression a mix of anger and disbelief, and instead of backing me up, he had the audacity to say, "Why would you offer to pay and then not follow through?" I could feel my face heating up with frustration. Because I didn't invite them, I shot back. Because I didn't expect to pay for an extra 6 people. I could tell my dad realized he had messed up, but instead of admitting it, he just sighed, acting like I was making a big deal out of nothing. At this point, I was beyond irritated, but I still didn't want to ruin the evening for my sister. So, I turned to the waitress and quietly asked how much the bill would be if we split it. The total for everything? $557.87. The total for just me, my dad, my sisters, and my grandpa? $314.19. Which meant my aunt and her kids had racked up a bill of $243.68. I didn't even hesitate. I'm not paying for them, I said flatly. They weren't my guests. My aunt's face twisted into an expression of exaggerated offense, like I had just personally insulted her entire existence. Are you serious? She scoffed. You're really going to make me pay for my own kids' food? Yes. Yes, I was. At this point, my dad knew there was no way I was budging, and since he was the one who invited them, he had no choice but to cover their bill. He begrudgingly pulled out his credit card, swiping it with visible frustration. The entire way home, he kept making passive-aggressive comments about how I was being selfish and how I had embarrassed him. But I wasn't having any of it. You invited them. You didn't ask me. You assumed I would pay. That's on you. Now, my dad is calling me an asshole because he had to cover their meal, and my aunt, unsurprisingly, is acting like I personally robbed her. But I genuinely don't believe I did anything wrong. She was never invited. She saw an opportunity to take advantage of a situation, and she took it. And my dad, instead of standing up to her, enabled it like he always does. So, was I the asshole? Because I really don't think so. Update 1. A few weeks passed after the ill-fated dinner at Olive Garden, and I naively thought the whole thing would eventually blow over. Families argue, things get tense, and then life moves on. That's how it should have gone. People forget, or at the very least, they get tired of rehashing the same conversation. But my aunt, being the relentless leech that she is, didn't just forget about it, she made it her personal mission to remind me at every opportunity that, in her eyes, I had dishonored the family with my greed. And she wasn't about to let it go until she squeezed some sort of penance out of me. It started as whispers, quiet little jabs woven into conversations when she thought I wasn't listening. She would casually bring up how times are tough in front of my dad, sighing dramatically as she talked about how hard it is to raise 5 children on her own without the generosity of others. She would make it a point to mention how some people, always vaguely, but just specific enough to let everyone know exactly who she was referring to, just didn't understand the importance of family, how some people didn't know how to take care of their own. At first, I ignored it. It was easy to brush off. She was always finding something to complain about, always playing the victim, always making herself out to be the struggling matriarch who deserved to be taken care of. But she wasn't satisfied with subtlety. Oh no, that wasn't enough. She wanted me to feel the weight of what she thought was my wrongdoing. Every time we had a family gathering, whether it was a casual barbecue, a simple family game night, or even just running into each other at the grocery store, she found a way to bring it up. At the 4th of July cookout, she sat next to my grandpa and made a loud remark about how, it must be nice to be so well off that you can just let family go hungry. At my sister's birthday, she made a show of telling her kids that they couldn't have extra cake because, not everyone believes in sharing. She didn't stop at family events either. She started bringing it up to extended family members, spinning the story into something almost unrecognizable. By the time my distant cousins were hearing about it, you'd think I had dragged her and her kids out of the restaurant myself and left them to starve on the curb. According to her, I had not just refused to pay, I had humiliated her. I had embarrassed her in front of her children, made them feel like beggars, made her feel like less than family. The way she told it, you would think I had personally taken the food off their plates and eaten it in front of them, sneering the whole time. The worst part was that my younger sister, being more sensitive to family drama, started getting affected by it. She wasn't there for the full Olive Garden debacle, so all she had to go off was my aunt's exaggerated sob story. And when someone repeats a lie enough times, it starts to sound like the truth. My sister would ask me to just give in, just once, just to make my aunt shut up. She hated the tension. She hated the way every family gathering felt like it was on the verge of turning into an argument. She wanted it to end, and to her, the easiest way to do that was for me to just pay for a meal and let my aunt feel like she had one. My dad, of course, refused to intervene. He never liked conflict. He never wanted to be in the middle of things, even though he was already in the thick of it just by virtue of being the one who had invited her in the first place. Every time I asked him to put an end to this ridiculous guilt trip, to tell her to stop, to say something, he would just shrug and say, "Well, she's family." As if that justified anything. As if being related to someone meant you had to let them drain you dry. It didn't take long for the next big event to roll around, this time, my grandfather's birthday dinner at Applebee's. I already knew what was coming. The moment I heard where we were going, I braced myself for the inevitable. My aunt had been playing the long game, wearing me down with her constant remarks, and this was the perfect opportunity for her to strike again. She had already painted herself as the victim, and what better way to push her narrative further than by forcing me into another uncomfortable situation. I made it clear from the start, I was only paying for my family. I repeated it multiple times. I said it in front of my dad. I said it in front of my sisters. I said it as we got in the car, as we pulled into the parking lot, as we walked inside the restaurant. I wasn't about to let history repeat itself. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. It never mattered what I said, because she had already decided how the night was going to go. Sure enough, as soon as we sat down, my aunt and her 5 kids started ordering like royalty at a feast. It was the same pattern all over again, appetizers, fancy drinks, multiple entrees, desserts before the main course even arrived. It was as if they hadn't eaten in days and had just stumbled into the promised land. Except this wasn't desperation. This was entitlement. This was the expectation that I would cave. That I would be so embarrassed by the spectacle that I would just give in and pay to make it all go away. The whole time, my aunt kept giving me these sideways glances, as if waiting for me to crack. As if she was waiting for me to finally drop my act and admit that, of course, I would take care of the bill. I ignored her, focusing on enjoying my grandfather's birthday, pretending that she and her kids didn't exist. But the moment the check arrived, the performance began. My aunt put on her best expression of feigned shock, looking between me and the bill like she had just discovered some great injustice. She tilted her head, furrowing her brows in exaggerated confusion, as if she couldn't possibly understand what was happening. "Oh, you're not paying again?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence. I felt my jaw tighten. My patience had been tested for weeks, stretched thin by her relentless campaign of manipulation, and now here she was, trying to push me one last inch. I waited for my dad to say something, to finally shut this down. But, just as I expected, he sighed and turned to me instead, rubbing his temple like this was somehow my problem to fix. "Maybe we should make a gesture of goodwill." A gesture of goodwill. That's what he called it. As if I was the one being unreasonable. As if I hadn't already done enough. As if it wasn't my aunt who had been leeching off this family for years, but rather me, the villain, the one who refused to hand over my money without question. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't let her bait me into another pointless debate. I simply reached into my wallet, put down enough money to cover my share, stood up, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear my aunt sigh pitifully and say that I put myself above my family again. Update 2. After the disaster at Applebee's, I made a vow to myself, I was done. No more joint dinners, no more shared meals, no more situations where my aunt could leech off my wallet while simultaneously acting like I was some kind of villain for not bowing to her demands. It was clear by now that no amount of reasoning, no number of firm statements, and no amount of self-respect on my end would change the fact that she saw me as a walking ATM. And worse, my father seemed content to let her continue exploiting me, all in the name of family. I was exhausted. The constant guilt-tripping, the manipulation, the sideways glances at every family gathering, it all wore on me. So I made my stance clear, I would no longer be participating in any more group dinners. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for casual meals. If food was involved and my aunt had even the slightest chance of showing up, I would not be there. It wasn't worth the stress. But then my older sister had her graduation. She was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over, the one who wanted to keep the family together despite all the obvious fractures. So when she called me and asked me to come to the family dinner afterward, I hesitated. I told her about my vow. I reminded her of what had happened at Olive Garden. And Applebee's. And every other time before that. I wasn't willing to put myself through that again. But she assured me that this time would be different. She promised me that there had been enough drama already. She swore up and down that she had spoken to my father, that my aunt wouldn't pull the same stunt, that nobody expected me to pay for anyone but myself. This was an important night for her, and she just wanted us all to be there, to celebrate together, without conflict. I wanted to believe her. More than that, I didn't want to be the reason there was tension on her special night. So against my better judgment, I agreed. The restaurant of choice was Texas Roadhouse. I arrived with a guarded sense of optimism, reminding myself that my sister had made me a promise. But the second I stepped inside and saw my aunt already sitting at the table, I knew I had made a mistake. She had arrived surprisingly quickly, earlier than usual, which meant she had been ready for this. She knew exactly what she was doing. And from the smug, self-satisfied look on her face, she was already setting the stage for another round of entitlement. Within minutes of sitting down, she began giving advice on what to order. Not just any recommendations, of course, only the most expensive items on the menu. She gushed about how the filet mignon was cooked to perfection here, how the seafood platters were worth every penny, how the loaded sides really made the meal complete. She encouraged my younger cousins to order big, to treat themselves. Her children acted like they had won the lottery. They flipped through the menu with wide eyes, rattling off their choices with giddy excitement. Steaks. Seafood. Extra toppings. Loaded baked potatoes with every possible add-on. Cocktails, non-alcoholic, of course, but priced just as high as the real thing. It was the same show as before, a repeat performance of the same scheme I had already endured more times than I could count. I stayed quiet. I let them dig their own grave. I focused on my meal, ate slowly, and refused to let myself get dragged into the same mess again. But the real moment of truth came when the bill arrived. It was a repeat of every other time. The check was placed on the table, the tension thick enough to cut with a steak knife, and all eyes turned to me. My father, once again, looked at me as if it was my turn to prove that I was a good family member, as if this was some kind of moral test that I had failed before and had the chance to redeem myself from now. My aunt, never one to miss an opportunity, chimed in with that same faux sweet voice, layering her words with an artificial kindness that barely hit her expectation. Well, if you want to make amends for the past times, that would be a wonderful gesture. That was it. That was the moment. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. A full, genuine laugh. I wasn't angry. I wasn't frustrated. I wasn't even surprised. It was just funny at this point. Hilarious, really, how predictable she was, how shamelessly she could pull the same stunt over and over without even trying to disguise it as anything else. I looked at her, still grinning, and said exactly what had been running through my mind for months. What should I apologize for? For paying my share instead of feeding 6 extra mouths. That shut her up. Her face twisted in immediate indignation, like I had just slapped her across the face in the middle of the restaurant. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of her wounded ego. She couldn't believe I had actually said it out loud. For a brief, glorious moment, nobody knew what to say. And then, just when it seemed like my father might step in with another one of his exhausted, half-hearted attempts to guilt me into submission, the waitress, who had probably witnessed more than her fair share of awkward family dinners, simply broke the silence with a practical, no-nonsense question. Do you want to split the bill? Without hesitation, I confidently replied, yes. That was it. No debate. No argument. No lingering tension. Just a straightforward, transactional exchange. My aunt sat there, stewing, clearly waiting for my father to jump in and insist that I needed to reconsider. But this time, something changed. My father sighed. He pulled out his credit card. He paid for her again, but this time, as I stood up to leave, I heard him mutter something under his breath. Something he had never said before. Something that made my grin widen just a little more. This situation is starting to annoy him. Finally. Update 2. The final explosion happened 2 months later. It was my father's birthday, and after everything that had happened, the endless dinners, the manipulations, the staged performances where my aunt tried to get me to foot the bill, I wasn't about to walk into another trap. This time, I was going to be proactive. This time, I was going to make sure there were no surprises. So, a few days before the dinner, I called my father directly. I didn't dance around the issue, didn't leave any room for ambiguity. I asked him plainly, "Auntie will come again?" I expected him to either give me a straight answer or at least acknowledge that we had a pattern at this point, but as always, he was evasive. He assured me it would just be a simple family dinner, nothing big, nothing dramatic. He didn't outright say no, but he didn't say yes either. And because I wanted to believe that, for once, things would be normal, I let it go. Then the night came, and I arrived at the Cheesecake Factory. The moment I stepped inside and saw the table, my stomach sank. There were more seats than there should have been. It wasn't a massive, glaring difference, just a few extra chairs, but I knew exactly what it meant. I stood there for a moment, staring at the arrangement, before letting out a slow breath and taking my seat. Not even a full minute later, my aunt walked in. But this time, she wasn't just with her 5 children. This time, she had brought her new boyfriend. I couldn't help myself. I looked at her, then at the extra chairs, then back at her, and said exactly what I was thinking, seriously. She, of course, pretended not to hear. She did what she always did, acted like her presence was perfectly normal, like she had been expected all along, like it was completely reasonable for her to turn what was supposed to be a family dinner into yet another opportunity to score a free meal. But this time, it was more than just her usual antics. It was something else, something bolder. She had tested the limits before, but now she was seeing just how far she could push it. The dinner itself felt like waiting for a storm to break. I barely tasted my food. I was too busy counting down the minutes, knowing exactly what was coming, knowing that the moment the check arrived, the same tired charade would play out. My aunt was predictable, if nothing else. The only difference this time was that I wasn't the only one who knew what was coming. My father knew it too. And then it happened. The bill arrived. The waitress set it down in the middle of the table, and for a brief second, there was silence. My aunt picked it up, made a show of glancing at the total, and then, right on cue, put on that same fake surprised expression she had perfected over the years. She turned to me, her voice dripping with the same artificial sweetness that had lost all meaning long ago, and said, "Oh, you probably want to make amends and pay the bill this time." I didn't even react. I barely looked at her. Instead, I simply nodded toward my father and said, "If he wants to feed you, let him pay." And then something completely unexpected happened. Instead of silently swiping his credit card like he had done so many times before, instead of sighing and muttering about family obligations, instead of turning to me with yet another guilt trip about how it was just a kind gesture, my father did something that changed everything. He turned to my aunt, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him, and said, "Maybe you'll pay for it yourself for once." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced at a family dinner before. It wasn't just awkward. It was deafening. My aunt's face immediately changed. The confident smugness she had worn all evening drained away, replaced with something much rawer, shock, disbelief, a flicker of embarrassment that she wasn't used to feeling. For years, she had played this game. For years, she had pushed and pushed, knowing that my father would always cave, that someone would always step in, that she would always get what she wanted in the end. But not this time. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to formulate a response. Finally, after a few seconds of stunned silence, she mumbled something about not bringing enough money with her. It was an excuse, a flimsy one, a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. She looked to her boyfriend for backup, but he didn't even try to intervene. He just sat there, staring at his hands, pretending like this wasn't happening. For the first time, my aunt had backed herself into a corner with no way out. She tried one last tactic, turning to the rest of the table with an exaggerated sigh, trying to appeal to the sense of obligation she had always relied on. She demanded that we pounce on her share, that we each chip in so she wouldn't be left in such a terrible position. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even my grandfather, who usually stayed out of these kinds of conflicts, simply took out his wallet, paid for himself, and silently got up from the table. One by one, people followed suit. My sisters, my cousins, even my father. No one acknowledged her plea. No one gave in. That was the end of it. That was the moment the cycle finally broke. After that incident, my aunt never pulled the same stunt again. She stopped showing up at family events unannounced. She stopped casually slipping into our dinner plans at the last second. She stopped assuming that someone, anyone, would always be there to cover her tab. And my father, though he never outright admitted that I had been right all along, never invited her again without my knowledge. I never had to apologize. But most importantly, no one ever asked me to pay other people's bills again.